Hey guys, welcome back. In this video I'm just going to run through replacing the clutch on my 2013 V-Star 650 Custom. It's not a terribly difficult job, but I'm not a mechanic. I just did it via the manual, so just use this as a reference. But just with some simple tools you can get the job done. Now I'm going to post the pages from the manual that have got the torque specs, but really you don't need a torque wrench for this. I didn't use one. And just don't over tighten anything. So we will have to take off the exhaust. We're going to have to take off the rear brake pedal to do this job. Yeah, so if you're not confident doing that, you shouldn't be changing your clutch. But let's kick off. Obviously we've got to either tipping the bike over on the stand will drain the oil to the side. So if you've freshly drained your oil or done a service recently and you want to save the oil, you don't have to drain it, but I am draining it here. I think it's a good idea to have fresh oil in if you're going to spend the money on a new clutch pack. So once you've found your sun plug, just go ahead and drain the oil. Get your 17mm ring end spanner or shifter, whatever you've got, and lefty loosey, just break it. Shouldn't be that tight, hopefully it's not. Undo the sun plug and get ready to catch the oil. Once you get that off, it's time to undo the rear brake lever and the right foot peg. So it's as simple as taking off these bolts here. So just take these two main bolts off here, and once they're loose, the only other thing you have to do is detach the spring that's attached to it, to the pedal, and just unclips. And I just lower it down, I don't take the back part off. Alright, now that I've got all the oil drained out, I'm going to take the oil filter cover off with my M6 Allen key or hex key. You don't have to do this first, you can take the exhaust off first, but this is just how I did it. So once you get the outer cover off, it's a two-piece cover. There's an outer cover, which is just for the shiny stuff, and then you have the inner cover, which has another few bolts, right? So undo all of those. Make note of which bolt goes where. Most of them are the same size, but a couple are longer, right? Because they actually go through the crankcase. Yeah. So I just put a rag there just to catch any oil, but if you've already drained it, you know, I'm just being pedantic, you're not going to get any oil. And there you have it, that's the last bolt. Once that's done, take the cover off. I keep the bolts in the actual cover to make sure, as you can see, one's longer than the others. Just so I don't mix it up. Alright, that's just what I do. Now let's get that front exhaust off. Here we go. We're going to loosen up and take off the rear attachment to the exhaust. And it's one bolt, as you can see. It's in a tricky spot, so you kind of just got to shift your spanner in there. The dog's not too impressed in the background, he's over it. So just get your spanner on. I think I've already loosened this one up, that's why it's so easy. And we're just going to undo that. So once you've done that, I'm going to move over to the front part of the bike to unbolt the exhaust manifold. So it's just two bolts at the front and these the type of bolts they are. So this is the setup I'm using to get these bolts out. They're a little bit tricky. You can reach them with just a normal socket, but it is just a little bit tricky and I didn't want to round them. So I'll just do the left one, and then I'm going to do the right one. So now I just make sure that I've undone that rear bolt and it just wiggles off. Just be nice and careful taking the exhaust off. Make sure you don't want to scratch your frame or scratch the chrome on the exhaust. Just drop it down, pull it out, job done. Alright, now I've got full access to the crankcase, so I've got full access to the clutch cover, as I call it. I'm going to use my socket set with the correct size hex key in it, just to speed things up a little bit. So I'm going to break all the bolts first in kind of a crisscross pattern, which is what you should be doing anyway with everything that you do here, even with the oil filter cover. I kind of take things off in a crisscross pattern, but now I'm just going around, and because I've already broken everything, and I'll just take everything off. And once you get everything off, depending how long it's been since your crankcase has been opened up, since you've had this cover off, it does take a bit of wiggling. So all the bolts are out. Just give it a clean up, and I'm just giving it a bit of a wiggle. I'm not going to hit it. Some people hit it with a mallet. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a wiggle, and it did take a bit to get off. Probably hadn't been off for quite a few years. So now, once you have that off, Bob's your uncle. Get the clutch pack. We're just we'll clean that cover up, put a new gasket on. You can see the old gasket's completely had it. So here I go. I'm about to take off the clutch pack. I am not taking the basket off because there's no need to do it. I actually checked this basket before making this video. It's in good shape. You can check out other videos. I'm going to break it in a crisscross pattern and just take it out. I'm just releasing the tension slowly on these springs because this is basically keeps the tension on the clutch. So I don't want anything to warp, so I'm just slowly releasing it, slow and steady win the race. Once I've done all the springs are out, I'm just going to take the cover off and we'll just take the clutch pack out. Let's undo the cover. Gotta be careful with all these, just don't, if it gives you any trouble, just double check that you're doing it right. It should come off really easily. I'm just going to get the pack out all in one go. I'm not messing about, so I'll get right at the back, pull it out all in one go. That's it there. So I'm making note of the order it's come out. There I'm just checking the basket. I've already done this before, but I'm checking the basket just to make sure there's no silly groove marks or nothing's broken off. It all looks really good. But make note of how your steel plates and friction plates are all lined up, because you're going to put it back in all exactly the same. You can see it lined up. I have an aftermarket one. We're going to use the Barnett one. It doesn't have the same grooves, but just make sure that your steel plates, there's a sharp side of the teeth and there's a smooth side. Just make sure that it goes back in the way it came out, yeah? So my bike was actually contrary to the way the manual says it's meant to be, but I put it back in the way the manual says. So I'm installing a Barnett heavy duty clutch kit, which comes with everything, comes with steel plates, which are about the same thickness as the original, to be fair, but obviously brand new, and new friction plates with a lot more, as you will see, with a lot more friction material. Definitely designed for more aggressive riding. And the springs, which I'll show you in a second, really make the difference. But you can see the difference in quality from the Barnett friction plates to the stock ones that I pulled out, and I might show you them again in this video. If you want to check it, I do have another video that shows that. Just to give you a comparison, this is the Barnett heavy duty spring, and that's the stock one that came out of it. You can just see there's so much more material, and the Barnett one's not messing around, so you've really, your clutch isn't going to be slipping anytime soon, especially with the horsepower this bike makes. These clutches are overkill. Okay, so after soaking my clutch plates, friction plates, overnight in oil, because that's what they suggest you do, or at least give it a few hours soaking in oil, I'm ready to reinstall it. So it's as simple as putting your steel plates and your friction plates in the order and direction that the old one came out. So it's as simple as that. So it's one steel plate, one friction plate, and you just sandwich it in. My advice is to keep the one you pull out stacked up, so you're literally just copying it, because some people get lost, right? So that's the thickness difference between the Barnett and the stock plate. So I'm just showing you the thickness difference, but yours will all be the same, right? If you've put the stock clutch back in, if you're selling the bike, remember, one side of the teeth is sharp, one side is rounded. Put it back in the bike the way it came out, or check the manual for the way it's meant to be, right? So here I go. Just take your time, get it right, and once you've got a rhythm, it's pretty easy. Yeah? It's steel plate, friction plate, steel plate, friction plate. Make sure it all lines up, all the grooves line up. On the Barnett, it doesn't have the same grooves as a stock one. Once that's all done, we're going to put the cover back on the clutch sparks, the cover back on, which I have the old clutch stacked in, and you can put that on and just torque that bolt down to spec, which I don't have a torque wrench, so I just do it snug, right? If you're a strong guy, just do it like wrist tight, but don't blame me if you over tighten it, because it was pretty tight to get off. So the person that had done it before obviously didn't have a torque wrench either that goes down that low. I have torque wrenches for cars and trucks, but I don't have ones that do 10 Newton meters. So just put your springs in, and then start torquing them down. You would be torquing down to spec all these bolts, but I'm just doing it very snug, very daintily, so I don't overdo it. And the bike's been fine for a couple 100 kilometers, so I figure it's right. So now's probably the most tedious part, is cleaning the old gasket off, especially if it's been on there a while. This has been on there for like 9 years. So I'm using a blade and I'm going to clean it off. I also used a little bit of a scouring pad, or you can use any of those plastic things. Use whatever you want, just be careful not to damage it's pretty soft metal. Just don't dig in, take your time and just go around and clean everything off. And obviously the mating surface, the mating surface for the crankcase cover as well, so clean off the other side. Most of the gasket came off most of the gaskets stuck to the cover, so I only had to clean off a little bit off the engine side. So now you can see that everything's cleaned up. Everything looks like as new as it can look. I want you to take the time. This is the point where you have to really be meticulous with it, because if you mess this up, you're going to have an oil leak. And as I found out many times, gaskets aren't always the easiest thing to work with. So this one's a little bit tricky to get on, right? As gaskets go. In the future, I probably won't go with this. Well, that's the part number for the genuine OEM gasket. I probably won't use it, right? I'll probably use sealant because I just think sealant's easier. It just takes a bit more time to set up, but I think it's just better. That's my own personal preference. You drop in the comments if you think differently. But yeah, let's put this gasket on and put the cover back on the bike. Just take my time here trying to line up the gasket, and I mean it is a bit tricky to hold it in place. This is a tricky gasket, so I will tell you, if you can use some kind of petroleum jelly or some kind of substance that's going to kind of not get in the way of the gasket to hold it in place, you're far better off than doing it the way I'm doing it. But it went on, and just start bolting it up in a crisscross pattern. I'm just loosely putting all the bolts in now, but when you start torquing it up, do it in a crisscross pattern so you don't warp anything. This is the way I did it. It's pretty self-explanatory. So like I keep the bolts in the case so that, or in order, so I know where they go. So while I was cleaning up the case cover, I had the bolts actually in the engine side. Because I don't like messing around. People can knock stuff, and then you have to figure out which bolt goes where. I'm always very careful. Right, so now we're going to put the oil filter back in, and I'm just lining up the cover, just making sure I've got all the bolts going in the right place. So before we do that, I am going to replace the oil filter O-ring, oil filter cover O-ring. You don't have to replace this gasket if it's okay, but that's the part number if you want to. But I'm figuring if you're doing this job and replacing the clutch, a gasket that's a couple of bucks and takes you a minute to change isn't a big deal, right? So all we're going to do is pull the old one out, put a bit of oil on this one and slip it back in. Okay, so it's time to put new oil filter in. Obviously it'll kind of fit one way with the fits in. It doesn't actually fit snug, so I double checked that there, but it kind of just sits in there, and it'll only sit in there one way. There's one protrusion which goes inside. It's not snug, but it gets snug obviously when you put the cover on. Let's do that. So once you've got the filter in, it's just a simple matter of putting the covers back on, torquing them back down. Like I said, I don't use a torque wrench, I just get it hand tight. I don't put a lot of torque on it, and it's been fine. It's not rocket science doing this, but just take your time. Make sure that you don't miss any bolts, because it will mean that, you know, your crankcase will leak. So once that's all down, then it's a simple matter of cleaning it all up and gradually putting everything back together the way it was, and filling the oil. So just get the front of the exhaust bolted back up, and you can torque it down to the specs I've given you if you choose to. I just do it hand tight, and I've never had a problem. Once you got the front of the exhaust on, obviously bolt up the back. Now put your peg mount back on and lever mount, and don't forget to reattach the spring for the lever. And obviously fill your bike back up, put your sump plug back in, fill your bike back up. There's a level for the oil. Now I've already filled it up before I did this video, so I didn't want to do it again, but basically I'm showing you where you fill the oil. Make sure that you use the right oil. This is the oil that I'm using, has to meet the Jap spec. Right? You don't have to use Penrite. I'm actually going to town showing you how to actually fill oil. If you don't know how to fill oil, you shouldn't have been doing this, but this is for another video anyway. Just check the level underneath. There's a sight underneath, and I'll show you that in a sec, where you check the oil, get the line in between. Now it's not in between those, it's pretty tricky to see actually, but there's two little marks. Get the oil to the higher end between those two marks. I had no problem doing this. I'd never done a clutch before on a bike, so this is the first time. I had no problem. The only issue I had was getting the gasket on. But other than that, bike runs like a dream, and I definitely recommend the Barnett. So like, subscribe, I'll see you next time.